I am Laura DeLuca, and this is a segment about what is Africa and what do you need to know about Africa, specifically the top 10 things you need to know about Africa. I'm an accidental Africanist. I actually got to know Africa through being in the Peace Corps, and I applied for a job for the School for International Training in England and was on the top of the list but didn't get the position. It actually seemed a little more familiar, but then I took the position teaching in the Peace Corps in Kenya, and that really changed my life. Since then, I've had the opportunity to work with refugees in Sudan and Uganda. I've had the opportunity to live in a tent in the Eastern Serengeti and work on wildlife conservation and community-based conservation in the Serengeti. I've had the chance to live in Cameroon and coach social innovators. I've also had the chance to live in South Africa post-apartheid and work on a peace-building book that had Ubuntu as its key theme. So I really love the continent and I'm really excited to share this material. So first one is that Africa is a really big and diverse continent. Big in terms of population, 1.3 billion people, and there are more than 50 countries. So never call Africa a country or African a language. There are over 2,000 languages. Within this huge space, there's great ecological diversity. Everything from Kilimanjaro, which is a snow-capped mountain in Tanzania, 19,000 feet, to jungles, to deserts, to fertile highland areas that are actually very cool. So a wide range. We've got the Nile, we've got all kinds of major features, the different coasts, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. But diversity is key and not the jungle kind of stereotype that we see in Tarzan. So number two, Africa is young and it's growing quickly. What do I mean by young? Demographically, 70% of the people on the continent in sub-Saharan Africa are under 30. So wrap your mind around that, 70% under 30. What does that bring? A lot of youthful enthusiasm and energy, but there's also a downside, fewer elders to do training and the wisdom traditions to pass on. The population is slated to double by 2050. Not only is the population growing, but the economies are some of the fastest growing economies in the world. According to Forbes, 2 out of 5 of the fastest growing economies are on the continent, Ethiopia and Rwanda, and there are many others that are close to 10%, 9%, which are really super high growth rates. That's not something we always associate. We think of in the Western media poverty, but we don't always think about the fast economic growth. Some of the cities like Dakar, Nairobi, Johannesburg are really seeing a shift from rural to urban. And that's not just a complete shift, there's a circular movement. There's a linkage between the rural areas, which get remittances and money from relatives living in the city. Relatives in the city go home and visit for vacation. Sometimes they move back to the rural area at the end of their life to retire. So it's a constant circular motion. It's not a one-way demographic shift. So number three, one of the things you really need to know is that Africa's largest trade partner is China. It used to be the US and shifted some years back. That has lots of social implications. In fact, when I'm leading my global seminar, I see Chinese workers on the road in Kenya. When I was in Kenya in February a few months ago, I rode the Chinese brand new Madaraka Express. So Chinese infrastructure is huge. Chinese are a big presence on the continent. Huge economic influence. They're the biggest in terms of infrastructure. One of the big questions that comes up is it a gain or is it more exploitation? What's the purpose? Is it a new scramble for Africa or is China contributing to Africa's development? So that's a big debate. Dambisa Moyo, who's a Zambian economist and wrote Dead Aid, really believes that the private sector development and work with China is a positive, that we don't need the kind of aid and the debt that put African countries into. But there are others who are a little bit more cautious on what that means for the continent, that China's really perhaps a new scramble for Africa, almost a new form of colonialism on the continent. And it really remains to be seen. It's a current demographic shift, it's a current financial shift. Forbes magazine again said that they're the biggest partner that Africa has is China. Something really interesting though, how do you even define Africa? Some people will say the entire continent, and others talk about Africa south of the Sahara. So places like Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt are often put in a separate category because of the strong Muslim religion or Islamic religious factor, and also high, mostly Arabic speaking. So some people will put those completely separate. I always look at the whole continent. The Horn of Africa is particularly important in terms of security issues. Al-Shabaab has operated there. Another security issue is Boko Haram in Nigeria. On a more innovative and positive note, I've lived mostly in East Africa, Kenya and Tanzania, Southern Africa. South Africa was actually named by Goldman Sachs as one of the top economic growth regions in the world under BRICS. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa was added to make it BRICS, the S standing for South Africa. Okay, so number 5, Africa is really innovative, and we don't always hear about that. One of my favorite examples is M-Pesa. M-Pesa, the stands for mobile, and the Pesa stands for money, and it's mobile money. They had and designed out mobile money app in Kenya in 2007. A lot of you might use Venmo and some other apps, Zelle. We just started getting those 2 or 3 years ago. So think about that. 2017, we were way behind, 10 years behind M-Pesa. Super innovative. So I have links in this YouTube to all kinds of really creative music as well, which are musical innovations, jazz, African hip hop, Afro pop, Hugh Masekela, Miriam Makeba, Angelique Kidjo, Fela and Femi Kuti, Papa Wemba, and much more. And some of those are old school artists, also some more modern, recent artists. Also, in terms of authors, there's incredible creativity. Many of you on your summer reading lists have probably read Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria, Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe. Chimamanda wrote Purple Hibiscus, which is very often on advanced placement high school lists, also college reading. So lots of innovation around writing. Number 6, Africa is really interconnected, and Ubuntu is a key symbol that is used across the continent. It was coined by Desmond Tutu, who is an anti-apartheid activist and religious figure in South Africa. He said, "I am because you are. People are not people without other people." In other words, community matters a lot. And that's something you see on the continent. Families, communities, elders really, really valued. And there's a certain creativity, but also wisdom in that tradition. So I had a chance to write a book using Ubuntu as the key concept across the continent as an indigenous concept for peace building. And it related to Gacaca courts in Rwanda, to Ubuntu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when Mandela became the leader of Free South Africa in the 90s. So this book was actually written and edited by me, Alphonse Kiesley, and Sylvester Maposa, and I wrote it while I was in Pretoria, South Africa, so it had a special resonance because South Africa is really where that term originated from. Okay, so I would say number 7, Africa has been heavily impacted by slavery, colonialism, and even neo-colonialism, which means a new form of colonialism. And that history of exploitation has had a negative impact. But Africans are working really hard to move past that challenge and move into a new era of agency and self-empowerment. So many African countries started getting independence in the late 50s. Ghana was one of the very first. I'm actually exactly the same age as Kenya. Kenya got its independence in 1963 after the Mau Mau Rebellion with Jomo Kenyatta as its first leader. So If you look at me, I'm kind of old, but I'm not that old when you think of the age of a country. I am the same age as many African countries. Just this summer, we've seen anti-colonialism movements with the Black Lives Matter, which has become a global movement, and we've seen statues of King Leopold II, torn down in Antwerp, Belgium. He was one of the most brutal Belgian leaders who really had a negative impact on Belgium, the Congo, DRC, horrible exploitation. And so it's kind of interesting to see 50 some years later, that statue being torn down and put up in a museum, but not in a public space anymore. So this is something that's super current and really an ongoing discussion and really important to what's happening right now in discussions happening about history at this very moment. So Africa has been a really important global travel destination, and I'm interested in ecotourism where the money goes to local communities. During the 2020 pandemic, starting in March, tourism was heavily affected. And so that there's always that lesson not to completely be dependent on tourism. How do you diversify so that tourism is a positive economic force, but doesn't leave you vulnerable to global forces like the pandemic or 9/11 or previous crises it's seen. Some of the most exciting places to visit on the continent: Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa, is 19,000 feet. The pyramids in Egypt, Timbuktu in Mali, they have an incredible festival of the desert every summer. Great Zimbabwe in Zimbabwe. Also, not just animals and safaris and ancient monuments, but current day clubs and restaurants. Senegal, particularly Dakar, is a great fashion capital with really sophisticated cities and really sophisticated city with sophisticated fashion, food, culture. Africa is facing a lot in terms of global climate change. Climate action is huge. This article in the New York Times is talking about the river Kariba, so much with the Sahel expanding. So climate action is really, really important. Africa has to deal with the brunt of climate change, which is often produced in the West. And so that's affecting coastlines, it's affecting farmers, pastoralists, who are all trying to anticipate the rain for their crops and for their animals. One upside to that is the Great Green Wall, which is an innovative project trying to connect a green wall across Africa to reduce the desertification of the Sahara, the increasing of the Sahara Desert. The Great Green Wall is an exciting innovation addressing climate change, and it's an Africa-led movement. And finally, number 10, Africa both produces and hosts some of the largest numbers of refugees in the world. Many people don't know this, but Uganda hosts the third largest number of refugees on the entire planet. Very often we only hear about refugees, but IDPs, internally displaced people, most often women and children, are people who can't cross an international border but are displaced with their own country. And that's another factor. A lot of this can be traced back to artificial colonial boundaries under the scramble for Africa that have led to long-lasting civil wars. So if you look at the 10 top things you need to know about Africa, there have been some incredible challenges, but there's also some credible innovation and positive travel opportunities, business opportunities, Africans taking the lead to solve their own problems. And I really look forward to facilitating a conversation where we dive deeper. You're actually doing the right thing by educating yourself and getting to know this incredibly rich and complex and amazing continent and its peoples much better. Asante sana, that's Swahili for thank you. That's the language I use in the field when I'm in Tanzania.